Here are 10 of the most notorious drug lords in history, in no particular order. 10. Rafael Caro Quintero. Rafael Caro Quintero is a Mexican drug lord and a founding member of the Guadalajara Cartel, one of the most powerful drug trafficking organizations in Mexico during the 1980s. Here is a brief history of his life. Caro Quintero was born on October 3, 1952, in Badiraguato, a small town in the state of Sinaloa, Mexico. He grew up in poverty and dropped out of school at a young age to help support his family. In the 1970s, he became involved in the drug trade and began to smuggle marijuana into the United States. 9. Gilberto and Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela. Gilberto and Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela are Colombian drug lords who were the leaders of the Cali Cartel, one of the most powerful drug trafficking organizations in Colombia during the 1990s. Here is a brief history of their lives. Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela was born on January 30, 1939, in Mariquita, Colombia, while his younger brother, Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela, was born on August 15, 1943, in Roldanillo, Colombia. The brothers grew up in a poor family and dropped out of school at a young age. In the 1970s, the brothers began to smuggle marijuana into the United States, and by the 1980s, they had become involved in the cocaine trade. They were key members of the Medellin Cartel, which was led by Pablo Escobar, but they eventually split from the Medellin Cartel and formed the Cali Cartel with other drug lords. The Cali Cartel was known for its sophisticated operations and its ability to evade law enforcement. The brothers were heavily involved in the cartel's operations, and they used their wealth and power to bribe officials and politicians in Colombia. They also used violence and intimidation to maintain their power and control over the drug trade. In 1995, the brothers were indicted in the United States on charges of drug trafficking, money laundering, and racketeering. They were extradited to the United States in 2004 and pleaded guilty to the charges. Gilberto was sentenced to 30 years in prison, while Miguel was sentenced to 20 years. The legacy of the Rodriguez Orejuela brothers continues to be felt in Colombia and around the world. Their involvement in the drug trade and their violent tactics have had a lasting impact on the country and on the lives of those affected by drug trafficking.
8. Manuel Noriega. Manuel Noriega was a Panamanian politician and military officer who served as the de facto leader of Panama from 1983 to 1989. Here is a brief history of his life. Noriega was born on February 11, 1934, in Panama City, Panama. He attended military school in Peru and later received training at the School of the Americas in the United States. He rose through the ranks of the Panamanian military and became a close ally of General Omar Torrijos, who ruled Panama from 1968 until his death in 1981. After Torrijos' death, Noriega became the de facto leader of Panama and served as the head of the military intelligence agency. He used his position to exert control over the government and the economy, and he became involved in drug trafficking and money laundering. In 1989, Noriega was indicted in the United States on charges of drug trafficking, and the U.S. government began to put pressure on him to step down. In December of that year, the United States invaded Panama and launched Operation Just Cause in an attempt to remove Noriega from power. Noriega surrendered to U.S. authorities and was brought to trial in the United States. He was convicted of drug trafficking, racketeering, and money laundering, and was sentenced to 40 years in prison. He served time in U.S. federal prisons and was later extradited to France and then to Panama, where he was sentenced to prison for crimes committed during his time in power. Noriega died on May 29, 2017, in Panama City at the age of 83. His legacy continues to be felt in Panama and around the world, as his involvement in drug trafficking and his authoritarian rule had a lasting impact on the country and its people.
7. Dawood Ibrahim. Dawood. Ibrahim is an Indian criminal and terrorist who is believed to be the leader of the D Company, a criminal syndicate based in Mumbai, India. Here is a brief history of his life. Ibrahim was born on December 26, 1955, in Ratnagiri, a coastal town in the state of Maharashtra, India. He grew up in Mumbai and started his criminal career as a petty thief and smuggler in the late 1970s. In the 1980s, Ibrahim became involved in organized crime and started to build his own criminal network. He became known for his involvement in extortion, smuggling, and illegal gambling, and he soon became one of the most powerful and feared gangsters in Mumbai. Ibrahim also had ties to terrorist organizations, including Al-Qaeda and the Lashkar-e-Taiba, and is believed to have played a role in the 1993 Bombay bombings, which killed over 250 people. In 1993, Ibrahim fled India and went into hiding. He is believed to have lived in various countries, including Pakistan, Dubai, and Saudi Arabia, and he continues to be a wanted fugitive in India. Despite being in hiding, Ibrahim has continued to run his criminal empire from abroad. His syndicate is involved in drug trafficking, arms smuggling, and other illegal activities, and is known to have connections with organized crime groups around the world. Ibrahim's legacy continues to be felt in India and around the world, as his criminal activities and ties to terrorism have had a lasting impact on the countries and people affected by them. He remains one of the most wanted criminals in India, and is considered to be one of the most powerful and dangerous gangsters in the world. 6. Frank Lucas. Frank Lucas was an American drug trafficker who operated in the Harlem neighborhood of New York City in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Here is a brief history of his life. Lucas was born on September 9, 1930, in LaGrange, North Carolina. He grew up in poverty and dropped out of school in the 6th grade. In the early 1950s, he moved to New York City and started working as a driver and enforcer for various organized crime figures. In the late 1960s, Lucas began importing heroin directly from Southeast Asia, which allowed him to bypass traditional drug trafficking routes and control the market in Harlem. He smuggled the drugs in the coffins of American soldiers who had died in Vietnam, and he became known for selling high-quality heroin that was cheaper and more potent than anything else available on the street. Lucas was able to expand his operation rapidly and became one of the wealthiest and most powerful drug traffickers in the United States. He lived a lavish lifestyle, owning multiple properties and expensive cars, and was known for his extravagant clothing and jewelry. In 1975, Lucas was arrested and charged with drug trafficking and related crimes. He was sentenced to 70 years in prison, but he cooperated with law enforcement and provided information that led to the arrest and conviction of several other drug traffickers. After serving over 15 years in prison, Lucas was released in 1991. He lived a relatively quiet life in New Jersey for the next several decades, occasionally making public appearances and giving interviews about his life as a drug trafficker. Lucas died on May 30th, 2019, at the age of 88. His legacy continues to be felt in the United States and around the world, as his exploits as a drug trafficker and his ties to organized crime have been the subject of numerous books, films, and television shows. 5. Griselda Blanco. Griselda Blanco, also known as the Queen of Cocaine, was a Colombian drug lord who operated in the United States during the 1970s and 1980s. Here is a brief history of her life. Blanco was born on February 15, 1943, in Cartagena, Colombia. She grew up in poverty and turned to a life of crime at a young age, working as a pickpocket and prostitute before becoming involved in the drug trade. In the late 1970s, Blanco moved to Miami, Florida, where she began building a drug empire. She was known for her ruthless tactics and willingness to use violence to eliminate her rivals, and she became one of the most powerful and feared drug lords in the United States. Blanco was involved in numerous criminal activities, including drug trafficking, money laundering, and murder. She was linked to the deaths of at least 200 people, and she is believed to have ordered the assassination of several law enforcement officials. In 1985, Blanco was arrested and charged with drug trafficking and related crimes. She was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison, but she continued to run her criminal empire from behind bars. In 2004, Blanco was deported to Colombia, where she lived in relative obscurity for several years. In 2012, she was gunned down outside of a butcher shop in Medellin, Colombia, in what was believed to be a revenge killing by a rival drug lord. Blanco's legacy continues to be felt in the United States and around the world, as her exploits as a drug lord and her connections to organized crime have been the subject of numerous books, films, and television shows. She remains one of the most notorious and influential drug traffickers in history. 4. Kunsa, also known as Chang Chi-Fu, was a Burmese drug lord who operated in the Golden Triangle region of Southeast Asia during the 1970s and 1980s. Here is a brief history of his life. Kunsa was born on February 17, 1934, in the Shan state of Burma, now Myanmar. He was a member of the Shan ethnic group and became involved in the opium trade at a young age. In the 1960s, Kunsa formed the Shan United Army, a guerrilla group that fought for greater autonomy for the Shan people. The group was also heavily involved in the drug trade, and Khun Sa became one of the wealthiest and most powerful drug lords in Southeast Asia. Khun Sa controlled much of the opium production in the Golden Triangle region, which encompasses parts of Burma, Thailand, and Laos. He was known for his brutal tactics and willingness to use violence to eliminate his rivals, and he became a major player in the global drug trade. Despite his criminal activities, Khun Sa maintained a level of popularity among the Shan people, who saw him as a hero fighting for their rights. He was also a thorn in the side of the Burmese government, which viewed him as a separatist and a criminal. In the 1990s, Khun Sa surrendered to the Burmese government, but he continued to live in luxury and maintain his drug operations. He was eventually forced to flee Burma and went into exile in Thailand, where he continued to run his drug empire. Khun Sa died on October 26, 2007, in Yangon, Burma, at the age of 73. His legacy as a drug lord and guerrilla leader continues to be felt in Southeast Asia and around the world, as his exploits have been the subject of numerous books, films, and television shows. 3. Amado Carrillo Fuentes. Amado Carrillo Fuentes, also known as El Señor de los Cielos, Lord of the Skies, was a Mexican drug lord who rose to power in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Here is a brief history of his life. Carrillo Fuentes was born on December 17, 1956, in Sinaloa, Mexico. He was the son of a prominent drug trafficker and grew up in a family that was heavily involved in the drug trade. In the 1980s, Carrillo Fuentes began working for the Juarez Cartel, one of the largest and most powerful drug organizations in Mexico. He quickly rose through the ranks and became one of the cartel's top lieutenants. In the early 1990s, Carrillo Fuentes took over the Juarez Cartel after the previous leader, Rafael Aguilar Guajardo, was killed. He expanded the cartel's operations and became one of the wealthiest and most powerful drug lords in Mexico. Carrillo Fuentes was known for his innovative smuggling methods, which included using airplanes to transport large quantities of drugs across the border. He also had a reputation for being a ruthless leader who was willing to use violence to eliminate his rivals. In 1997, Carrillo Fuentes died under mysterious circumstances. It is believed that he underwent plastic surgery to alter his appearance and evade capture, but the procedure went wrong, and he died on the operating table. Despite his relatively short career as a drug lord, Carrillo Fuentes had a significant impact on the drug trade in Mexico and around the world. His innovative smuggling methods and his role in expanding the Juarez cartel's operations cemented his place as one of the most notorious drug lords in history. 2. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman is a notorious Mexican drug lord who was the leader of the Sinaloa Cartel, one of the largest and most powerful drug trafficking organizations in the world. Here is a brief history of his life. Guzman was born on April 4, 1957, in La Tuna, a small town in the state of Sinaloa, Mexico. He grew up in poverty and began working in the drug trade at a young age. In the 1980s, Guzman joined the Sinaloa Cartel, which was led by Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo at the time. Guzman quickly rose through the ranks and became one of the cartel's top lieutenants. In the 1990s, Guzman became the leader of the Sinaloa Cartel after Felix Gallardo was arrested. He expanded the cartel's operations and became one of the most powerful drug lords in the world. Guzman was known for his brutal tactics and his willingness to use violence to eliminate his rivals. He was also known for his ability to evade capture, having escaped from prison twice, once in 2001 and again in 2015. In 2016, Guzman was captured by Mexican authorities and extradited to the United States to stand trial on drug trafficking charges. He was found guilty in 2019 and sentenced to life in prison. Despite his imprisonment, Guzman's legacy as one of the most notorious drug lords in history continues to be felt. His exploits have been the subject of numerous books, films, and television shows, and his ability to evade capture for so long has made him a legend in the world of organized crime. 1. Pablo Escobar. Pablo Escobar was one of the most notorious drug lords in history, and his story is both fascinating and tragic. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1, 1949, in Rio Negro, a small town in Colombia. He grew up in poverty and often participated in petty crime to make ends meet. As a young man, he sold contraband cigarettes and fake lottery tickets and even stole cars. He dropped out of college and began to focus on a life of crime. In the 1970s, Escobar began to work in the drug trade, starting with marijuana smuggling. He then moved on to cocaine, which was rapidly becoming a lucrative business. Escobar worked his way up in the drug trade, eventually forming the Medellin Cartel with other drug lords in the area. The cartel was responsible for most of the cocaine that entered the United States during the 1980s and was known for its extreme violence and brutality. Despite his criminal activities, Escobar was revered by many in Colombia for his charitable work. He built schools, hospitals, and churches in poor neighborhoods, earning him the nickname Robin Hood. However, his philanthropic efforts were also a way to gain support from the people and to hide his criminal activities. As the Medellin Cartel grew in power, so did Escobar's wealth. He was estimated to be worth over $30 billion, making him one of the richest men in the world. However, his power and wealth came at a great cost. Escobar's cartel was responsible for bombings, assassinations, and kidnappings, and he declared war on the Colombian government in the 1980s. The Colombian drug war was a period of extreme violence and instability, and Escobar was at the center of it all. Despite his immense power and wealth, Escobar could not escape his fate. In the early 1990s, his empire began to crumble. The Colombian government, with the help of the United States, began to crack down on the drug trade. Escobar went into hiding, but he was eventually located in Medellin. On December 2, 1993, he was killed in a shootout with Colombian authorities. The legacy of Pablo Escobar continues to be felt in Colombia and around the world. His life and crimes have been the subject of books, documentaries, and even television series. While some remember him as a hero and others as a villain, there is no denying the impact that he had on the world. And that's the top 10 notorious drug lords of all time. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell button for more upcoming videos. See ya!